The morning of November 15th, 1978, broke crisp and bright over Homestead, Florida. At the edge of town, where suburban sprawl gave way to endless sawgrass and mangrove wilderness, Dr. Marcus Caldwell loaded his weathered khaki backpack into the bed of his Ford pickup truck. The 42-year-old botanist from the University of Miami had dedicated the last 8 years of his career to documenting rare orchid species deep within the Everglades. But this expedition felt different. His hands, usually steady from years of delicate fieldwork, trembled slightly as he secured his camping gear and research equipment. Before you continue with this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Now, back to Marcus's fateful journey into America's most mysterious wilderness. The Everglades in the late 1970s remained largely untamed, a vast river of grass stretching from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay. Unlike today's more accessible park areas, much of the interior was genuinely wild territory, where a wrong turn could mean the difference between life and death. Marcus had made this journey dozens of times before, but never alone, and never with the weight of personal turmoil pressing on his shoulders. His wife of 15 years, Catherine, had filed for divorce just 3 weeks earlier. The papers, citing irreconcilable differences, sat on his kitchen table next to unpaid bills and overdue mortgage notices. The university had also begun questioning his extended field research, suggesting his frequent absences were affecting his teaching responsibilities. Some colleagues whispered that Marcus was becoming obsessed with finding the elusive ghost orchid, a legendary species that had eluded botanists for generations. That morning, Marcus made his final preparations at Flamingo Station, the remote outpost that served as the southernmost point of Everglades National Park. Park Ranger Tommy Reeves, a weathered Seminole man in his 50s who had worked these waters since the early 1960s, watched with growing concern as Marcus checked and rechecked his supplies. "Dr. Caldwell, you sure you want to head out there alone?" Tommy asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the swamp's unforgiving nature. "Weather Service is calling for a cold front to move through tomorrow night. Temperature could drop into the 30s, maybe lower." Marcus barely looked up from his field notebook, where he had meticulously marked GPS coordinates gathered from Seminole tribal elders who claimed to know the ghost orchid's location. "I'll be fine, Tommy. I've got enough supplies for 5 days, and I know these waterways better than my own neighborhood." But Tommy wasn't convinced. He had seen experienced outdoorsmen vanish without a trace in the Everglades' labyrinthine channels and islands. The ecosystem was a maze of similar-looking mangrove tunnels, where one wrong turn could lead a person deeper into trackless wilderness. Alligators, venomous snakes, and the ever-present threat of getting lost made solo expeditions extremely dangerous. "At least take the radio," Tommy insisted, handing Marcus a military surplus field radio. "Check in every 12 hours. If I don't hear from you by Saturday morning, I'm calling in a search." Marcus accepted the radio reluctantly, more to appease Tommy than from any real intention of using it. His academic pride had been wounded by the university's criticism, and he was determined to prove himself by locating the ghost orchid independently. He believed this discovery would validate his career and perhaps even save his marriage, though Catherine had made it clear that his obsessions were precisely what drove her away. The aluminum John boat cut through the dark water with barely a sound, its small outboard motor pushing Marcus deeper into the heart of the Everglades. Spanish moss draped from ancient cypress trees like funeral shrouds, and the morning mist created an otherworldly atmosphere that seemed to muffle even the calls of herons and ibises. Marcus followed a series of narrow channels marked only by subtle changes in vegetation and water depth, navigation techniques he had learned from Seminole guides during his earlier expeditions. By midday, he reached Turner Island, a small hammock of higher ground where he planned to establish base camp. The island, barely 2 acres of dry land surrounded by miles of wetland, had served as a Seminole fishing camp for generations. Ancient shell middens and the remains of chickee huts testified to centuries of human presence, but now the island felt utterly isolated from the modern world. Marcus set up his olive-green military surplus tent beneath a grove of gumbo limbo trees, their red bark peeling like sunburned skin. The familiar routine of making camp helped calm his nerves, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of purpose returning. This was where he belonged, not in sterile university lecture halls or contentious divorce proceedings, but in the wild heart of Florida's ecosystem. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Marcus began his methodical search for the Ghost Orchid. According to Seminole legend, the rare Dendrophylax lindanii bloomed only on specific species of trees under precise environmental conditions. The elders had described a particular grove of pond apples on the island's western edge, where the combination of humidity, light filtration, and air circulation created the perfect microclimate. Marcus worked with scientific precision, documenting every plant species, measuring soil acidity, and recording temperature and humidity levels. His field notebook, filled with detailed observations and careful sketches, the same methodical approach that had made his reputation in botanical circles. But as evening approached, frustration began to mount. Despite following the tribal descriptions exactly, he found no trace of the legendary orchid. The first radio check came at sunset. Tommy's voice crackled through the static. "Flamingo base to Dr. Caldwell, come in." Marcus hesitated before responding. Part of him resented the intrusion on his solitude, but he recognized Tommy's genuine concern. "This is Caldwell. I'm at Turner Island, all secure. Weather's holding steady." "Copy that, Doctor. How's the search going?" "Still preliminary work," Marcus replied, unwilling to admit his lack of progress. "I'll have more to report tomorrow." "Roger. Next check at 0800 hours. Stay safe out there." As darkness fell over the Everglades, Marcus prepared a simple meal of canned beans and instant coffee heated over a portable camping stove. The sounds of the swamp came alive around him, the deep bellowing of alligators, the splash of fish jumping, and the rustle of small mammals moving through the undergrowth. These were familiar sounds that had once brought him comfort, but tonight they seemed somehow ominous and unsettling. He tried to push away thoughts of Catherine and their failing marriage, focusing instead on reviewing his research notes by flashlight. The Ghost Orchid had become more than a scientific pursuit. It represented redemption and vindication. If he could locate and photograph the species, document its habitat requirements, and publish his findings in a major botanical journal, it would re-establish his credibility and perhaps prove to Catherine that his work had genuine value. But doubts crept in as Marcus lay in his sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds of the Everglades. What if the Seminole elders had been mistaken about the location? What if the orchid no longer existed in this area, driven to local extinction by environmental changes or human interference? What if he was chasing a ghost, literally and figuratively? The second day dawned grey and humid, with heavy clouds building on the horizon. Marcus ate a quick breakfast of granola bars and instant coffee before resuming his search with renewed determination. He expanded his survey area, using his canoe to explore smaller islands and hammocks within a 2-mile radius of his base camp. The work was physically demanding. Paddling through narrow channels choked with vegetation, Marcus had to constantly watch for submerged logs, shallow water, and the occasional alligator basking on muddy banks. His khaki field clothes became soaked with sweat and swamp water, and mosquitoes and biting flies tormented him despite liberal applications of insect repellent. By afternoon, Marcus discovered what appeared to be promising habitat on a small, unnamed island about a mile southeast of Turner Island. The grove of pond apple trees matched the Seminole description perfectly, and the microclimate seemed ideal for epiphytic orchids. His excitement grew as he documented the site, taking photographs and making detailed notes about the vegetation community and environmental conditions. It was here, as he worked beneath the canopy of pond apple trees, that Marcus made his first significant discovery. Not the ghost orchid he sought, but evidence of previous human presence. Half hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and debris, he found the remains of an old campsite, rusted tin cans, fragments of canvas, and most intriguingly, a partially buried metal box. Marcus carefully excavated the container, his archaeological training taking over despite his botanical focus. The box was military surplus, probably dating from World War II era, and inside he found a collection of items that told a compelling story. Faded photographs of young men in military uniforms, letters written in Spanish, and a small leather-bound journal with entries dating back to 1943. The journal belonged to a Cuban exile named Eduardo Vasco, who had apparently used this island as a base for covert operations during the war years. The entries described secret meetings, weapons caches, and plans for operations against German U-boats operating in the Gulf of Mexico. Marcus realized he had stumbled upon a forgotten piece of wartime history, a reminder that even these remote islands had played roles in global conflicts. But the discovery also raised troubling questions. If Eduardo Vasco had been operating from this island in the 1940s, what had happened to him? The journal entries stopped abruptly in September 1943, with no explanation or closure. Marcus found himself wondering if he was following in the footsteps of another man who had vanished without a trace in the Everglades wilderness. The 8 o'clock radio check that evening brought Tommy's increasingly concerned voice through the static. Flamingo Base to Dr. Caldwell. How you holding up out there? Weather Service is confirming that cold front for tomorrow night. Marcus considered mentioning his historical discovery, but decided to keep it to himself for now. Everything's fine, Tommy. Made some interesting observations today. I may extend the expedition an extra day or two if conditions permit. There was a long pause before Tommy responded. Doctor, I really don't recommend that. This cold front is going to be severe, and you're pretty exposed out there. Why don't you plan to head back tomorrow afternoon? I'll keep monitoring the weather, Marcus replied evasively. But I'm close to something important here. I need more time. After signing off, Marcus spent the evening examining Eduardo Vasco's journal more carefully. The faded ink and yellowed pages told a story of dedication and sacrifice, of a young man who had risked everything for his beliefs. Marcus found himself identifying with Vasco's isolation and determination, and he began to understand why someone might choose to disappear rather than face failure or disappointment in the outside world. That night, as temperature began to drop, and the first cold winds of the approaching front rustled through the trees, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would continue his search regardless of the weather, pushing deeper into the Everglades until he found the Ghost Orchid or exhausted every possibility. The outside world, Catherine, the university, his mounting debts, could wait. The third day brought dramatic weather changes that should have sent Marcus retreating towards civilization. The temperature dropped nearly 20 degrees overnight, and a steady north wind created whitecaps on the normally placid channels. Grey clouds hung low over the swamp, and the air carried the smell of rain and approaching storm. Marcus ignored Tommy's increasingly urgent radio calls, switching off the device to avoid further pressure to abandon his mission. He had entered what psychologists might recognize as a state of dangerous obsession, where rational decision-making becomes subordinated to a single, overwhelming goal. The Ghost Orchid had become not just a scientific pursuit, but a symbol of everything missing from his life. success, recognition, and purpose. Working methodically despite worsening conditions, Marcus expanded his search to include a series of small islands and hammocks that local fishermen called the Maze. This area of interconnected waterways and similar-looking islands had claimed numerous victims over the years, as navigational errors could easily lead to becoming hopelessly lost in the labyrinthine channels. It was on one of these unnamed islands that Marcus finally found what he had been seeking. Growing on the trunk of an ancient bald cypress tree nearly 15 feet above the waterline was a cluster of ghost orchids in full bloom. The delicate white flowers, with their ethereal appearance and sweet fragrance, represented the culmination of his years of research and the vindication he desperately needed. Marcus spent hours documenting the discovery, taking photographs from every angle and making detailed notes about the habitat conditions and plant associations. He carefully collected botanical specimens according to scientific protocols, preserving flowers, leaves, and root samples in specialized containers. This was the discovery that would make his career, the finding that would justify all his sacrifices and obsessions. But as he worked, Marcus became increasingly aware of his precarious situation. The cold front had arrived with unexpected intensity, and temperature continued to drop as afternoon shadows lengthened. His hands, numb from cold and extended exposure to water, struggled with the delicate work of specimen preservation. More troublingly, the maze of channels that had led him to this island now looked confusingly similar in the grey afternoon light. Marcus attempted to retrace his route, but the combination of falling temperature, failing light, and disorientation proved overwhelming. Each channel looked like the one he had followed earlier, and his GPS unit, relatively primitive by modern standards, seemed to be providing conflicting readings. Panic began to set in as Marcus realized he might have made a fatal error in judgment. The final radio transmission from Turner Island came just as darkness fell and the first freezing rain began to patter on the tent canvas. Tommy's voice, tight with worry, crackled through the static one last time. "Dr. Caldwell, this is Flamingo Base. Please respond immediately. We have emergency weather conditions developing." But there was no response from Marcus Caldwell. The radio sat silent in his abandoned base camp, while the botanist struggled through the maze of dark channels, his aluminum boat motor sputtering in the cold as he desperately tried to find his way back to safety. The ghost orchid specimens, carefully preserved in his collecting kit, would be his last scientific contribution to the world. By morning, when Tommy Reeves organized the first search parties, Marcus Caldwell had vanished into the vast wilderness of the Everglades, as completely as if the earth had swallowed him. The search would continue for days, involving park rangers, Coast Guard helicopters, and volunteer searchers, but no trace of the missing botanist would ever be found. 20 years would pass before the mystery of Dr. Marcus Caldwell's disappearance would resurface in the most unexpected way, bringing closure to some questions while raising others that would haunt everyone involved. The Everglades, as always, would keep its secrets until it chose to reveal them. The search for Dr. Marcus Caldwell began at dawn on November 18, 1978, when Park Ranger Tommy Reeves discovered the abandoned campsite on Turner Island. Marcus had missed his scheduled radio check 12 hours earlier, and the severe cold front that had swept through South Florida overnight left no doubt that the missing botanist was in mortal danger. Temperatures had dropped to 28 degrees, deadly hypothermia conditions for anyone unprepared or lost in the wilderness. Tommy's weathered hands shook slightly as he examined the tent, still standing but with the rainfly flapping loosely in the bitter north wind. Inside, Marcus's sleeping bag lay neatly arranged, his extra clothing folded and stacked with scientific precision. The camp showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. It appeared that Marcus had simply left for what he intended to be a day trip and never returned. Most troublingly, Tommy discovered the military field radio sitting on Marcus's camp table, deliberately switched off. The discovery sent a chill through the experienced ranger that had nothing to do with the unseasonably cold weather. In 30 years of working the Everglades, Tommy had learned that when people ignored safety protocols and lost contact with the outside world, it usually meant tragedy was imminent. The initial search effort mobilized quickly but faced enormous challenges. The maze of channels and islands where Marcus had been working covered nearly 50 square miles of wilderness, much of it accessible only by shallow draft boat or on foot. Coast Guard helicopters from Miami struggled with low clouds and intermittent rain, while ground searchers in john boats found their movements hampered by strong winds and rough water kicked up by the cold front. Dr. Janet Morrison, Marcus's colleague from the University of Miami, arrived at Flamingo Station by mid-morning to provide crucial information about his research plans. A marine biologist in her late 30s, who had collaborated with Marcus on several Everglades studies, Janet brought with her copies of Marcus's field notes and research proposals that revealed the scope of his ambitious orchid survey. Marcus was methodical to a fault, Janet explained to Tommy as they studied topographical maps in the ranger station. He would have marked every location he planned to visit. The problem is, he was looking for a species that might not even exist in this area anymore. Janet's revelation about Marcus's obsession with the ghost orchid added another dimension to the search. The legendary species was known to bloom in remote, nearly inaccessible locations, which meant Marcus might have pushed far beyond his planned search area in pursuit of his scientific goal. The combination of professional desperation and personal crisis had apparently driven the botanist to take unprecedented risks. Search teams worked through the day in deteriorating conditions, methodically checking each island and hammock within a 5-mile radius of Turner Island. Marine units from Monroe County Sheriff's Department joined the effort, along with experienced Everglades guides who volunteered their time and local knowledge. But as afternoon wore on with no trace of Marcus or his boat, hopes began to fade. The breakthrough came just before sunset when searcher Billy Osceola, a Seminole guide with intimate knowledge of the maze area, discovered Marcus's aluminum john boat pulled up on a small unnamed island, about 3 miles southeast of Turner Island. The boat's outboard motor was tilted up, and a makeshift anchor of swamp cypress root suggested Marcus had intentionally beached the craft for an extended exploration of the island. Billy's trained eye immediately noticed details that painted a troubling picture. Muddy footprints led from the boat into the island's interior, but they were erratic and wandering, not the purposeful tracks of an experienced researcher following a planned route. More concerning, scattered equipment near the boat suggested Marcus had been in a hurry or possibly disoriented when he landed. The island itself was a classic Everglades hammock, about 2 acres of elevated ground covered with gumbo limbo trees, wild coffee plants, and dense understory vegetation. Spanish moss, draped from overhead branches, created a cathedral-like atmosphere, while palmetto fronds rustled in the cold wind. It was exactly the type of habitat where ghost orchids might be found, but it was also easy to become lost in the maze of similar-looking plant communities. Following Marcus's tracks, Billy and the other searchers found evidence of extensive botanical work, disturbed soil, broken branches, and scattered plant debris that indicated someone had been conducting systematic specimen collection. But the trail became increasingly erratic as it moved deeper into the island's interior, suggesting disorientation or panic had set in during Marcus's final hours. Near the island's center, searchers discovered Marcus's field notebook and collecting kit abandoned beneath a large pond apple tree. The notebook's final entries, dated November 17th, revealed the tragic sequence of events that had led to his disappearance. In increasingly shaky handwriting, Marcus described finding perfect ghost orchid habitat and expressed excitement about breakthrough discoveries that would change everything. But the final entry, barely legible and obviously written under extreme stress, told a different story. Lost, can't find boat, temperature dropping, should have listened to Tommy. Catherine was right about my obsessions. If someone finds this, tell her I'm sorry. The discovery of Marcus's final message sent shockwaves through the search team. Here was confirmation that the missing botanist had realized his error, but had been unable to correct it before hypothermia and disorientation overwhelmed his survival instincts. The search expanded immediately, with teams combing every square foot of the island and surrounding waters, but no trace of Marcus himself was found. As darkness fell and temperatures dropped again toward freezing, search coordinators faced a grim reality. Marcus Caldwell had been missing for over 24 hours, in conditions that could kill an unprepared person within hours. Even if he had found shelter, his chances of surviving another night were extremely remote. The search continued for 4 more days, expanding to cover nearly 100 square miles of Everglades wilderness. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras swept the area repeatedly, while boats dragged channels and divers searched deeper water near the discovery site. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort, including Marcus's estranged wife Catherine, who flew down from Gainesville to coordinate family liaison efforts. Catherine Caldwell's presence added emotional weight to the already tragic situation. A quiet woman in her early 40s, she had genuinely loved Marcus despite their marital problems, and she blamed herself for not preventing his final, desperate expedition. "He was trying to prove something to me," she told reporters, tears streaming down her face. "I never needed him to find some rare flower. I just wanted him to come home." Despite the massive search effort, no additional evidence of Marcus's fate was discovered. The official search was called off on November 23, 1978, after 5 days of intensive searching. Park Service officials concluded that Marcus had become lost and disoriented in the maze of channels, probably succumbing to hypothermia during the record-breaking cold snap that had gripped South Florida. Tommy Reeves, who had coordinated much of the search effort, struggled with feelings of guilt and responsibility. "I should have insisted he take a partner," Tommy would later reflect. Nobody should go into the deep Everglades alone, no matter how experienced they think they are. The veteran ranger retired from the Park Service 6 months later, unable to shake the memory of Marcus's final radio transmission and his own failure to prevent the tragedy. Dr. Janet Morrison returned to the University of Miami to sort through Marcus's research materials and academic legacy. What she found confirmed her worst fears about her colleague's state of mind during his final months. Marcus's research notes revealed an increasingly desperate obsession with finding the ghost orchid, viewing the discovery as his last chance for professional redemption and personal vindication. The ghost orchid specimens that Marcus had apparently collected during his final day were never recovered, adding a bitter irony to his disappearance. If he had indeed found the legendary species, his discovery died with him in the vast wilderness of the Everglades. The scientific community mourned the loss of a dedicated researcher, while his family and friends struggled to understand how an experienced botanist could have made such fatal errors in judgment. For 20 years, the mystery of Dr. Marcus Caldwell's disappearance would remain one of the Everglades' most troubling, unsolved cases. Park rangers continued to search for his remains during routine patrols, and amateur investigators periodically attempted to solve the mystery using new technology or investigative techniques. But the vast wilderness that had claimed Marcus kept its secrets, offering no clues about his final fate. Until April 15, 1998, when a routine park maintenance crew would make a discovery that would resurrect the case and provide answers that no one had expected, while raising new questions that would prove even more disturbing than the original mystery. 20 years after Dr. Marcus Caldwell vanished in the Everglades, the spring of 1998 brought exceptional drought conditions to South Florida. Water levels dropped to historic lows, exposing vast areas of wetland that had been underwater for decades. Ancient Seminole fishing camps, forgotten hunting blinds, and debris from countless hurricanes emerged from the receding waters like archaeological treasures rising from the depths. It was during this unusual drought that Park Maintenance Supervisor Carlos Mendez and his crew were working to clear storm debris from a remote area near Whitewater Bay, approximately 8 miles northeast of where Marcus had made his final camp 20 years earlier. The location was accessible only during extreme low water, when normally submerged limestone platforms became temporarily walkable. Carlos, a third-generation Cuban-American who had worked for the Park Service for 15 years, noticed something unusual protruding from the mud near the base of an ancient mangrove island. What appeared to be weathered canvas caught his attention, but as his crew cleared away accumulated sediment and debris, they realized they had discovered something far more significant than routine storm damage. Partially buried in the limestone platform was a military surplus duffel bag, green canvas faded to gray by decades of sun and saltwater exposure. The bag's construction and hardware suggested it dated from the 1970s or early 1980s, and despite years of exposure to the elements, the heavy-duty zipper still functioned. Inside the waterlogged bag, Carlos found items that made his hands tremble with recognition. A plastic-wrapped University of Miami faculty ID card bearing the photograph and name of Dr. Marcus Caldwell, botanical collecting equipment including specimen bottles and preservation chemicals, and most remarkably, a leather-bound journal wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags. The journal's existence was nothing short of miraculous. Marcus's careful preparation, wrapping the notebook in waterproof materials before placing it in the duffel bag, had preserved the contents despite 2 decades of exposure to the harsh Everglades environment. Water damage had affected some pages, but most of the entries remained legible, offering an unprecedented glimpse into the final days and thoughts of the missing botanist. Carlos immediately contacted park headquarters, and within hours, a team of investigators had arrived at the remote site. Leading the investigation was Detective Sarah Chen, a Miami-Dade Police Department specialist in cold cases who had recently transferred to environmental crimes. Sarah, a methodical investigator in her mid-30s, approached the 20-year-old case with fresh eyes and modern investigative techniques. The journal's contents proved to be far more revealing than anyone had expected. Marcus's entries, written in his distinctive, precise handwriting, documented not only his botanical research, but also his increasingly desperate emotional state during the weeks leading up to his disappearance. The early entries revealed a man struggling with personal failure and professional disappointment, but the later pages told a far more complex and troubling story. According to the journal, Marcus had indeed discovered the ghost orchid on his final expedition, finding multiple specimens growing on an unnamed island in the maze area of the Everglades. His detailed botanical descriptions and GPS coordinates confirmed that he had made a significant scientific discovery, the first documented population of ghost orchids in that region in over 50 years. But the journal also revealed that Marcus's disappearance might not have been the simple case of getting lost that investigators had assumed. In his final entries, Marcus described encountering someone else on the island where he found the orchids, someone who shouldn't have been there and who seemed hostile to my presence. The most chilling entry, dated November 17, 1978, the day of Marcus's disappearance, was written in increasingly erratic handwriting. He's following me. Keeps asking about what I've found, what I've documented. Says the area is protected and I need to leave immediately. Tried to take my specimens. Had to hide the orchid samples. Something not right about this situation. Detective Chen studied these entries with growing concern. The implication that Marcus had encountered another person in the remote Everglades on the day he vanished completely changed the nature of the investigation. What had been classified as a missing person case now had potential criminal implications. Further examination of the journal revealed additional troubling details. Marcus had hidden his most valuable orchid specimens in a makeshift cache somewhere on the island, apparently fearing that the mysterious stranger might steal his research. He had also documented coordinates for multiple locations where he had observed suspicious activities, unmarked boats, temporary camps, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment in areas supposedly closed to public access. The journal's final entry, barely legible and obviously written under extreme stress, provided the most disturbing revelation. Can't find my boat. He moved it or damaged it. Stuck here overnight. Temperature dropping fast. If I don't make it back, tell Catherine the orchids are at coordinates 25 degrees 12:15 and 81 degrees 05:32 W, buried under the large pond apple tree. Also, tell Tommy, something illegal happening in Section 7. Drug runners, maybe. Need investigation. This final entry transformed the Marcus Caldwell case from a tragic accident into a potential homicide investigation. The mention of drug runners was particularly significant, as South Florida in the late 1970s was experiencing unprecedented levels of drug trafficking, with remote areas like the Everglades serving as perfect smuggling routes and temporary storage locations. Detective Chen immediately began researching historical drug enforcement activities in the Everglades during 1978. What she discovered provided crucial context for Marcus's final journal entries. DEA records indicated that 1978 had been a particularly active year for drug interdiction efforts in South Florida, with multiple major smuggling operations using remote Everglades locations as transfer points and temporary bases. Several significant busts had occurred in the months following Marcus's disappearance, including the seizure of a major cocaine storage facility on an island approximately 6 miles from where Marcus's journal was discovered. Drug enforcement agents had long suspected that smugglers were using multiple sites throughout the remote Everglades, but the vast wilderness made comprehensive surveillance nearly impossible. The possibility that Marcus had inadvertently stumbled upon a drug smuggling operation provided a compelling explanation for his disappearance. Smugglers protecting their operations would have had strong incentives to eliminate witnesses, especially someone like Marcus, who was documenting his location with scientific precision and maintaining detailed records of his observations. Detective Chen's investigation took on renewed urgency as she realized that Marcus's case might be connected to unsolved crimes from the height of the cocaine trafficking era. The journal provided specific coordinates and detailed descriptions that could potentially help solve other cold cases from the same period, but the investigation also faced significant challenges. 20 years had passed since Marcus's disappearance, and most of the key figures in 1970s drug trafficking operations were either dead, imprisoned, or had disappeared. Physical evidence from the original crime scene, if indeed a crime had occurred, had long since been destroyed by weather, wildlife, and time. The discovery of Marcus's journal also had profound emotional impact on those who had known him. Catherine Caldwell, now remarried and living in North Carolina, flew to Florida immediately upon learning of the discovery. Reading her ex-husband's final thoughts and learning about his scientific success brought both closure and renewed grief. He did find his orchid, Catherine said through tears as she reviewed the journal with Detective Chen, "but it cost him everything, just like I was afraid it would." Catherine's mixed emotions, pride in Marcus's discovery, sorrow for his death, and anger at the circumstances that had led to his disappearance, reflected the complex legacy of the missing botanist. Tommy Reeves, now retired but still living near Everglades National Park, also studied Marcus's final journal entries. The veteran ranger's decades of experience in the Everglades gave him unique insight into the geographical and environmental details that Marcus had documented. Tommy's local knowledge would prove crucial in Detective Chen's efforts to locate the sites described in the botanist's final writings. As the investigation expanded, Detective Chen began to understand the full scope of the mystery surrounding Marcus Caldwell's disappearance. The journal had provided answers to some questions, but had raised others that would require extensive field investigation and careful analysis of 20-year-old evidence. The next phase of the investigation would involve returning to the remote Everglades locations described in Marcus's journal, searching for his hidden orchid specimens and attempting to reconstruct the events of November 17, 1978. What Detective Chen would discover in those remote islands and channels would provide the final pieces of the puzzle and reveal a truth more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Chen's field investigation began on May 2, 1998, exactly 3 weeks after the discovery of Marcus Caldwell's journal. Armed with GPS coordinates from the botanist's final entries, Chen led a small team that included retired Ranger Tommy Reeves, marine biologist Dr. Janet Morrison, and forensic anthropologist Dr. Michael Santos into the remote heart of the Everglades. The team used modern equipment that Marcus had never possessed: satellite GPS navigation, ground-penetrating radar, and digital photography to systematically search the coordinates described in the 20-year-old journal. The location, an unnamed island in the maze area of the central Everglades, was accessible only by shallow draft boat during low water conditions. Tommy Reeves, now 73 but still sharp and experienced, served as guide and interpreter for the younger investigators. His intimate knowledge of Everglades geography and decades of Park Service experience proved invaluable in navigating the complex waterways and identifying landmarks that had changed dramatically over 2 decades. "This area looks different now," Tommy explained as they approached Marcus's coordinates. "Hurricanes, drought, and natural succession have changed the vegetation, but the basic topography is the same." His weathered hands pointed to subtle features, slight elevation changes, distinctive tree patterns, and water flow indicators that confirmed they were approaching the correct location. The island itself was smaller than expected, probably less than an acre of elevated hammock surrounded by shallow channels and sawgrass prairies. Dense vegetation, gumbo-limbo trees, wild coffee, and thick understory growth created an almost impenetrable canopy that filtered sunlight and maintained high humidity even during the current drought conditions. Dr. Janet Morrison, who had collaborated with Marcus on previous orchid research, immediately recognized the habitat characteristics described in his journal. "This is perfect ghost orchid environment," she confirmed, examining the epiphyte communities growing on the trunk of ancient trees. Marcus would have been excited to find this location. Following the coordinates specified in Marcus's final journal entry, the investigation team located the large pond apple tree where he claimed to have hidden his most valuable specimens. Ground-penetrating radar indicated disturbed soil at the base of the tree, and careful excavation revealed a makeshift cache that had been protected by plastic containers and sealed with wax. Inside the cache, perfectly preserved despite 20 years of burial, were Marcus's ghost orchid specimens, pressed flowers, detailed botanical drawings, and photographic slides that documented his remarkable discovery. The scientific value of these materials was extraordinary, as they provided the first confirmed evidence of ghost orchid populations in this remote area of the Everglades. But the cache contained more than botanical specimens. Marcus had also hidden a second journal, a smaller notebook containing detailed observations about the suspicious activities he had witnessed during his final days in the field. This journal provided specific descriptions of unmarked boats, temporary camps, and what appeared to be drug transfer operations occurring in supposedly protected wilderness areas. The second journal's entries were methodical and detailed, reflecting Marcus's scientific training applied to criminal observation. He had documented times, dates, boat descriptions, and even attempted to photograph some of the suspicious activities. The photographs, though somewhat degraded, showed men loading and unloading bundles from boats at remote locations throughout the central Everglades. Dr. Michael Santos, the forensic anthropologist, began a systematic search for human remains while the other team members examined Marcus's hidden materials. Using metal detectors and careful visual surveys, Dr. Santos searched for any evidence of what might have happened to the missing botanist after his final journal entry. The breakthrough came on the second day of the field investigation. Approximately 200 yards from the orchid cache, Dr. Santos discovered what appeared to be weathered clothing fragments caught in the root system of a fallen mangrove tree. Closer examination revealed khaki fabric consistent with the field clothes that Marcus was known to wear, along with metal eyelets from hiking boots and corroded buckles from a field pack. More significantly, Dr. Santos found human skeletal remains scattered beneath years of accumulated debris and vegetation growth. The bones were obviously old, showing evidence of prolonged exposure to the elements and animal scavenging, but dental records would later confirm the identity as Dr. Marcus Caldwell. The condition and location of the skeletal remains told a troubling story. The bones were found far from any normal walking route on the island, in an area that would require deliberate effort to reach. More disturbing, several bones showed evidence of trauma, fractures consistent with blunt force injury rather than accidental falls or animal attacks. Detective Chen carefully documented the discovery site while Dr. Santos conducted a preliminary forensic examination. The evidence suggested that Marcus had not died from exposure or getting lost, as investigators had assumed for 20 years, but had likely been murdered by someone who discovered his presence on the island. The forensic evidence supported the scenario described in Marcus's journal. He had apparently encountered someone involved in illegal activities, had attempted to document what he observed, and had been killed to prevent him from reporting his discoveries to law enforcement. The killer or killers had then hidden his body in the remote location where it remained undiscovered for 2 decades. As the investigation team prepared to leave the island with their grim discoveries, Tommy Reeves made one final observation that would prove crucial to understanding the case. Examining the area where Marcus's remains were found, the experienced ranger noticed old machete cuts on nearby vegetation, cuts that appeared to date from approximately 20 years earlier. "Someone cleared a path here," Tommy observed, pointing to the distinctive diagonal cuts on mangrove branches. This wasn't natural growth patterns. Someone deliberately cut through this vegetation, probably to drag something heavy to this location. The implication was clear. Marcus's body had been intentionally concealed by someone familiar with the remote Everglades terrain. The discovery of Marcus Caldwell's remains and his hidden journals provided closure to a 20-year-old mystery, while raising new questions about criminal activities in the Everglades during the height of South Florida's drug trafficking era. Detective Chen's investigation had transformed a presumed accidental death into a confirmed homicide, but identifying the killer after 2 decades would prove to be an entirely different challenge. The case would ultimately connect to broader investigations of organized crime activities in 1970s South Florida, providing crucial evidence for prosecutors pursuing related cold cases. Marcus's meticulous documentation of criminal activities, preserved for 20 years in his hidden cache, would help solve multiple unsolved crimes from the cocaine trafficking era. But perhaps most importantly, the investigation vindicated Marcus Caldwell's reputation as both a scientist and a person of integrity. His discovery of the Ghost Orchid population, documented in his hidden specimens, represented a significant contribution to botanical science. His courage in attempting to document criminal activities, even at personal risk, demonstrated the moral character that his colleagues and family had always recognized. The final chapter of the Marcus Caldwell case would involve bringing his killers to justice, a complex legal process that would rely on the preserved evidence from his final days and the dedicated work of investigators who refused to let his murder go unsolved. The forensic analysis of Marcus Caldwell's remains and the evidence found at the remote Everglades site took several months to complete. But by September 1998, Detective Sarah Chen had assembled a comprehensive picture of the botanist's murder and its connection to large-scale drug trafficking operations in 1970s South Florida. Dr. Michael Santos's forensic examination confirmed that Marcus had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, specifically fractures consistent with being struck repeatedly with a heavy, blunt object, such as a machete handle or boat paddle. The injuries were clearly intentional and ruled out any possibility of accidental death or death from natural causes. Carbon dating and environmental analysis of the skeletal remains confirmed that death had occurred in late 1978, consistent with Marcus's known disappearance. Trace evidence found with the remains, including fibers, paint chips, and unusual soil samples, provided additional clues about the circumstances of his death and the people responsible. The most significant breakthrough came from analysis of the photographs and detailed observations in Marcus's hidden journal. Working with DEA historical records and consulting with retired drug enforcement agents who had worked South Florida in the 1970s, Detective Chen was able to identify specific criminal operations that Marcus had inadvertently documented. The photographs, though somewhat degraded, showed boats and individuals that matched descriptions from multiple unsolved cases involving drug trafficking and related violence in the Everglades region. Several of the boats photographed by Marcus had been subjects of DEA investigations, and at least 2 of the individuals captured in his surveillance images were known associates of major drug trafficking organizations. Former DEA agent Robert Martinez, who had coordinated drug interdiction efforts in South Florida during the late 1970s, provided crucial historical context for Detective Chen's investigation. Martinez, now retired and living in Tampa, had maintained detailed files on criminal organizations and their operations in the Everglades. The Caldwell murder makes perfect sense in the context of what was happening out there in 1978, Martinez explained during extensive interviews with Detective Chen. These guys were moving millions of dollars worth of cocaine through remote locations, and they didn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened their operations. Martinez's files contained references to a specific criminal organization led by Cuban exile Carlos Vega, who had operated extensively in the Central Everglades during 1978 and 1979. Vega's organization was known for extreme violence against anyone who interfered with their smuggling operations, and they had used multiple remote islands as temporary storage and transfer points. According to DEA records, Vega's organization had been responsible for at least 6 murders, between 1977 and 1980, including several cases where victims had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The organization was eventually dismantled in 1981 following a major federal investigation, but several key figures, including Vega himself, had never been captured. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that Marcus Caldwell had unknowingly photographed and documented activities at one of Vega's primary transfer sites. The coordinates in Marcus's journal matched exactly with the location that DEA agents had identified as a major drug storage facility during raids conducted in early 1979, several months after Marcus's disappearance. The timing was particularly significant. Marcus had disappeared on November 17, 1978, just 2 weeks before Vega's organization was scheduled to receive a major cocaine shipment at the same location. His presence on the island, combined with his systematic documentation of suspicious activities, would have been seen as an immediate threat to a multi-million-dollar operation. Further investigation revealed that at least 2 members of Vega's organization were still alive and potentially prosecutable for Marcus's murder. Miguel Santos, no relation to the forensic anthropologist, was serving a life sentence in federal prison for unrelated drug trafficking charges, while Roberto Fuentes was living under an assumed identity in Nicaragua, but was subject to U.S. extradition treaties. Detective Chen worked closely with federal prosecutors to build cases against both suspects. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Marcus's photographs and journal entries placed both men at the murder site during the relevant time period, and forensic evidence from the crime scene was consistent with their known methods and equipment. The legal proceedings were complex and lengthy. Miguel Santos eventually agreed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter in Marcus's death in exchange for information about other unsolved murders committed by Vega's organization. His testimony provided crucial details about the events of November 17, 1978, and confirmed the scenario that investigators had reconstructed. According to Santos's confession, Marcus had been captured while attempting to photograph a drug transfer operation on the remote island. He had been questioned about what he had seen and what records he had made, but when he refused to surrender his photographs and research notes, Vega's men had killed him to prevent him from reporting their activities to law enforcement. Roberto Fuentes was extradited from Nicaragua in 2001 and eventually convicted of first-degree murder in Marcus's death. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, providing final justice for a murder that had remained unsolved for over 20 years. The resolution of the Marcus Caldwell case brought closure to family members and colleagues who had wondered for decades about the botanist's fate. Catherine Caldwell, now Catherine Henderson after remarrying, attended both trials and expressed gratitude for the investigators who had never given up on finding the truth. Marcus was always dedicated to uncovering the truth, she said, after Fuentes' conviction. It seems fitting that his own careful documentation helped bring his killers to justice. He would have been proud that his work contributed to solving not just his own case, but other crimes as well. The case also had significant impact on Everglades law enforcement and conservation efforts. Marcus's hidden journals provided evidence that helped solve 3 additional murders and numerous drug trafficking cases from the 1970s and 1980s. His detailed documentation of criminal activities in protected wilderness areas led to enhanced security measures and improved coordination between park rangers and federal law enforcement agencies. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus Caldwell's scientific legacy was finally recognized and preserved. His ghost orchid specimens, carefully preserved in their hidden cache for 20 years, provided crucial data for conservation efforts and helped establish protected status for several Everglades locations. The University of Miami established the Marcus Caldwell Memorial Research Station in the Everglades, dedicated to continuing his botanical research and environmental conservation work. Dr. Janet Morrison, who had helped coordinate the investigation and preservation of Marcus's scientific materials, served as director of the new research station. Marcus gave his life for his scientific work and his principles, she reflected. The least we can do is ensure that his discoveries and his dedication to truth are never forgotten. The ghost orchid population that Marcus discovered in 1978 still thrives on the remote Everglades island where he made his final scientific observations. The location is now protected as part of the Marcus Caldwell Ghost Orchid Preserve, ensuring that future generations of botanists and conservationists can continue the work that cost him his life. Tommy Reeves, who had coordinated the original search for Marcus and later helped locate his remains, lived to see the case solved and the killer convicted. The veteran ranger passed away peacefully in 2003 at the age of 78, knowing that he had helped bring justice to a friend and colleague who had died trying to do the right thing. The Marcus Caldwell case serves as a reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in even the most beautiful and seemingly peaceful natural environments. It also demonstrates the importance of perseverance in seeking justice and the power of scientific dedication to uncover truth, even decades after tragic events. Dr. Marcus Caldwell's story, from his disappearance in the Everglades to the discovery of his journal 20 years later, represents both the tragedy of a life cut short and the triumph of truth ultimately prevailing over violence and cover-up. His legacy lives on not only in his scientific discoveries, but in the reminder that courage, dedication, and careful documentation can help ensure that even the most remote crimes do not go unpunished.